Back to the grind. The weekend was over and all the children who had obtained permission to spend the weekend with their parents and families had returned. Anna's weekend had been exceptionally wonderful. Basking in the aftermath of all the adulation that she had received, Anna had a joyous spell as she got home and found out that Flurry was ready to deliver a litter. There was a lot of excitement and scurrying about as Mrs. Lawrence attempted to ease the process for the cat. Hot towels and rolls of cotton was carried from the kitchen to the little corner near the study, which was now so busy before it was finally announced that Flurry had delivered 6 kittens. Anna was thrilled to see 6 little balls of fur, as she called them, and could not keep her eyes or hands off them. Before she realized it, Monday morning had arrived and off she went to school again. The cultural event had been a success, but now the school environment changed to a more serious hue as it was time for some academic evaluation. The midterm exams were 4 weeks away and the children as well as their teachers geared themselves up for the storm. The music classes were taken over by subject teachers for revision or extra classes, and the school soon bore a somber ambience. Lena struggled with geography and maths. She was glad she had Anna for a friend, as she was an angel who helped her with a great deal of patience. Mr. Philip's strategy of making the 2 girls sit together had really paid off. Daisy found history a nightmare, and David did not know which subject was worse than the other. He was at the top of the game when it came to any form of physical activity, but his mental faculties failed him when they needed to be applied alone. How he wished he could ask Anna for help too, he thought as he watched her and Lena studying together. Unfortunately, he had not mustered the courage to speak with Anna yet. If only he knew, Anna would have willingly helped anyone. She had only promised herself not to ask David for help if she could help it, but would have been more than willing to help him. Anna, needless to say, was a favorite among the teachers. Strangely, the animosity that Daisy had felt towards her had also vanished, especially after she had been so nice to her during the cultural event. Daisy gradually became a part of the group, and the 3 of them would have their meals together in the cafeteria. Anna had fallen into a comfort zone with Lena and Daisy without much effort. They would spend the time between classes studying, chatting, and forging stronger bonds of friendships. She had created a little niche for herself in school. Everyone who knew her looked upon her with fondness and admiration. Mr. Philip was filled with pride every time Anna performed well, as though she was his very own protégée. Sister Agnes was convinced that she was God's special child and could never find fault with the little dear. Miss Patricia, of course, looked upon her as an angel in disguise. All in all, she was showered with love and affection both at home and in school. It was decided to hold mock tests in the class to determine which child needed help and which topics needed a little extra attention. The children groaned in unison when Mr. Philip announced a series of surprise tests. He wrote down 5 problems on the board and gave the children half an hour to solve them. There was pin-drop silence for a while, as all the children struggled away with their heads down in their notebooks except for one child. David looked around him and found all the children laboring away, and his heart sank. He did not know where to begin. His pen slipped from his hands and fell with a soft sound which sounded like a shattering blast to him. He bent down to retrieve it and noticed that his palms were all sweaty. He nervously wiped his palms on his trouser leg and sat up only to find Mr. Philip's gaze on him. He swallowed painfully and looked at the problems again. None of them made any sense to him. He made an attempt at solving them as there was no point staring blankly at the questions. He wrote and struck off whatever he was doing, rewrote and repeated the act of striking out his work. It was difficult for him to sit through that half an hour. He gave up when there were still 15 minutes to spare and looked around him at the other children. Most seemed to be writing away in earnest. The thought that he might be the only one who did not know how to solve a single problem started worrying him, and he stole a glance at Mr. Philip. He heaved a sigh of relief when the bell rang, sounding the end of the class. He shied away from the rest of the children and sneaked out of the class for a break. Mr. Philip collected the answers and saw Philip leave but chose to overlook the incident. He had noticed the boy's discomfort throughout the hour and had a sense of what he was going to find in his answers. He wondered what to do with David. Were the other teachers also having a difficult time with the boy? He decided to talk to the others and find out. He took a child's help to carry the answer sheets and made his way to the staff room. David returned to the classroom rather nonchalantly and took his place at the back of the class. The class had already settled down after an animated discussion on what the answers to the questions had been. David was glad he had avoided that. The rest of the day passed rather uneventfully, but then tomorrow was another day. There would be a bigger problem on hand tomorrow when Mr. Philip returned. Mr. Philip shook his head as he looked down at David's notebook. It was scrawled and scratched upon aimlessly. He felt sorry as he was aware of David's background. David's father had fallen ill and died when he had moved to the city of Pune in search of work. His mother had to feed and fend for 3 children, of whom David was the oldest. David was 5 years old at the time of the tragedy and had taken it rather badly. He had turned into a rebel and a bully. His mother found it exceedingly difficult to handle him and had asked the church to help. David was given admission in the school in the hope that the environment would help him heal and mend. Mr. Philip sighed. He was sure he had seen sparks of brilliance in the boy, but somehow getting across to this child seemed difficult. David seemed determined to wreck everything by being nasty and defiant. The other teachers seemed to agree that David seemed to enjoy doing the opposite to what he was told. He did not seem keen on academics at all and could spend all day on the football field. It was only when he was doing physical activity that the boy seemed happy. How was he to score David's test report? The boy had not solved a single problem. He sincerely wanted to help the child but did not know how to turn him around. He was happy with Lena's progress though and patted himself on the back for having thought of pairing her up with Anna. It was showing results. Would it be possible to work something like that out on David? He wondered. He decided to speak to the child. In his next scheduled class, he told the children what their shortcomings were, but pointedly left David out of the discussion. David squirmed. This was not a good sign. Mr. Philip praised Lena for her hard work and improvement. He gently asked David to change his preferred seat from the back of the classroom to just behind Lena and Anna in the second row. Anna was stunned. She had avoided David since the day in the library and was extremely uncomfortable at the thought of having that bully sit right behind her. She was not the only one. David was aghast. Moving from the back bench to the second row in front of the class was certainly not his cup of tea. No way he was going to comply. He tried every excuse that he could think of, but Mr. Philip had made up his mind. He dragged himself mournfully to the second row while the rest of the class rearranged themselves. Nothing went unnoticed by Mr. Philip's trained eye. He just carried on with the class as though nothing had happened. David could hardly wait for the class to end. That moment finally arrived, but there was no respite for David. Mr. Philip asked David to help carry his papers to the staff room. Once they got to the staff room, Mr. Philip asked David to place the papers on his table and turned his undivided attention onto him. He showed him his test paper and asked him where and what the problem was. David shifted his weight from one foot to the other while he hemmed and hawed. When he found no satisfactory answer forthcoming, Mr. Philip informed David about the seriousness of the issue, about how his education was at stake and what it would mean to his mother. He told him that he had changed his seating so that he could take the help of a bright and helpful child like Anna to understand his subject if he hesitated to ask his teachers. Blimey, David was aghast. How could he ask Anna for help? He had behaved abominably and they were not even on talking terms. Well, he could not tell Mr. Philip that. So he just hung his head, stared at his shoelace that had come undone, and kept shifting his weight about. Once back in the class, he was subdued for the rest of the day. The rest of the children could not help but notice that there was no mischief being planned. David seemed very pensive and thoughtful. He decided to try but did not know where to start from as he was really lagging behind the rest of the class. Oh dear, he could not let his mother down. Why did life have to be so difficult? Anna decided to continue to ignore David as before. After all, how did it matter if he was seated behind her? It did not mean she had to interact with him. Lena asked Anna if she could help her with some difficulty in geography, and soon David was forgotten. Unknown to the girls, David was listening to their discussions and Anna's explanation with more than usual interest. He was careful to be discreet though. The girl was brilliant. She made it all seem so simple. A couple of days later, when they had all got used to being around each other, David mustered the courage to speak to Anna and ask her for help with geometry. Anna was completely taken by surprise. Here was this bully whom she was trying to ignore, asking for her help. Anna, being the good-natured girl that she was, decided not to hold a grudge against him and agreed. David was so relieved. From this juncture on, yet another friend was added to her close circle. David was so grateful. He was almost like a faithful puppy who would go out of his way to ensure Anna was comfortable. The series of surprise tests carried on and David struggled with a lot, but in a happier frame of mind. Soon the midterm exams were upon them and the students became less boisterous. There was a noticeable change in David, which was often remarked upon in the staff room. The boy was making an effort to learn just when all his teachers were beginning to give up on him. Mr. Philip smiled to himself. There was still some hope left. There always is, he was convinced. The staff room bustled with activity as the teachers carried answer sheets from the staff room to the classroom and back. There were piles of papers to be corrected and results would have to be declared after the 10-day break post the exams. The children were looking forward to going home for a short break.